You can't pay. Get out before I call the police. A customer shouted at the elderly man in a worn military jacket. The store owner looked at the trembling veteran, then stood up and said firmly, "No, today he eats for free and anyone who objects can leave right now." 3 days later, a convoy of military vehicles filled the street. More than 20 Marines stepped out, standing at attention in front of the store. Who was the person that made an entire military unit rise to say thank you in civilian life? Type 1 if you believe kindness deserves to be defended. Welcome to QH. Let's uncover what really happened. Adam Leone locked Leona's market at exactly 5 a.m., just as he had every morning for 16 years. At 46, his movements carried the efficiency of a man who found comfort in routine. The small convenience store sat on a quiet corner in Everton, North Carolina, just 4 miles from the Naval Air Station. The morning light filtered through the windows as Mark stocked shelves with meticulous care. The store wasn't large, just 3 aisles of essentials, a refrigerated section, and a small counter where Mark rang up purchases and occasionally shared conversation with regulars. "Dad would have been proud," he murmured, straightening a row of canned goods. His father, Anthony Leone, had served 27 years in the Navy before opening this store. When cancer took him 5 years ago, Mark inherited not just the business, but a philosophy. Always stand for what's right, especially when it costs you something. The bell above the door jingled at 7:43 a.m. An elderly man entered, shoulders slightly hunched beneath a faded military jacket. White hair peeked from under a weathered cap bearing a Marine Corps emblem. His movements were deliberate, each step placed with the careful precision of someone conserving energy. Mark nodded as the man, surely in his 80s, selected a loaf of bread, a carton of eggs and a small can of soup. Other customers trickled in, a woman in scrubs grabbing coffee, a construction worker purchasing energy drinks, a businessman checking his watch impatiently. When the elderly veteran reached the counter, he pulled out a worn leather wallet and opened it expectantly. His weathered hands stilled as his eyes registered confusion, then embarrassment. "I seem to have mixed up my days," he said softly. "Pension doesn't come until Friday. I thought today was." His voice trailed off as he returned the items to the counter. "I'll come back. Sorry for the trouble." Before Mark could respond, a voice cut through the morning quiet. "You can't pay. Get out before I call the police." The businessman stepped forward, face flushed with irritation. "Some of us have actual jobs to get to." The store fell silent. A mother pulled her child closer, avoiding eye contact. The construction worker suddenly found great interest in a nutrition label. Mark stepped from behind the counter, positioning himself between the businessman and the veteran, whose eyes were now fixed on the floor. "Sir," Mark addressed the veteran, not the shouting customer, "please take your groceries. Today they're on the house." "I don't need charity," the veteran whispered. "It's not charity," Mark replied. "It's respect." The businessman scoffed. "What about paying customers? I shop here every day." Mark turned, meeting the man's gaze direct. "And you're welcome to keep shopping here, but this gentleman served our country, and today he's my honored guest. Anyone who has a problem with that is free to leave. This is ridiculous." The businessman sputtered, placing his items on a shelf. "You've lost a customer." As the door slammed behind him, Mark carefully bagged the veteran's groceries. "I'm Howard," the elderly man said, extending a trembling hand. "Howard Finch. I'll be back Friday to settle up." "No rush, Mr. Finch," Mark replied. "Your money's no good here today. Not every right action gets applauded. But if you don't speak up when it matters, who will?" Sometimes the quietest stands create the loudest echoes. As Howard departed, Mark noticed a metal bracelet on the veteran's wrist, worn thin from decades of wear. The engraving was visible. "First Recon, Fallujah." Mark recognized the significance. The 1st Reconnaissance Battalion had been among the first Marines into Fallujah, one of the bloodiest urban battles American forces had faced since Vietnam. During lunch, Mark searched online for information about the unit. The articles painted a grim picture: intense house-to-house fighting, devastating casualties, moments of extraordinary courage under unimaginable pressure. That Howard had survived such an ordeal, and at an age when most men would already have retired, spoke volumes about his resilience. By mid-afternoon, Mark's phone buzzed with notifications. A customer had recorded the morning's confrontation and posted it online with the caption, "Store owner kicks out paying customer to give handouts to alleged veteran." Comments flooded in, divided between support and criticism. Another business trying to go viral with military worship. Pathetic marketing stunt. "My grandfather was a real vet," and never took handouts. This guy's probably faking for sympathy. Mark silenced his phone, uncomfortable with both criticism and praise. He hadn't acted for an audience, just done what felt right in the moment. The following day, fewer customers entered the store. Several regulars were conspicuously absent. A produce supplier called to reschedule their delivery, citing logistical issues, though they'd never missed a Tuesday delivery in 3 years. Mark's niece, Mira, visited after school, hopping onto a stool by the counter. "Uncle Mark, why are people saying mean things about you online?" "Katie's mom said you threw somebody out of the store." Mark sighed, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, Mira, doing what you think is right doesn't make everyone happy, but you helped someone. Isn't that good?" Before he could answer, the bell jingled. A postal worker entered with a small package requiring signature. Inside was a faded photograph. A group of Marines in desert camouflage, arms around each other's shoulders, standing before a battered building. In the center stood a younger Howard Finch, still recognizably the same man, though decades stronger. On the back, handwritten in blue ink, "One of the best men I've ever served with. If he ever needs anything, call me. Major Macaulay, Fort Ironclad." A business card was paperclipped to the corner with a phone number and military extension. That evening, Mark's sister called, concern evident in her voice. "Mark, have you seen the reviews online? Your store rating has dropped almost 2 stars in a day. Someone's even suggesting boycotting the place." Mark glanced at the photograph, now propped against his register. "It'll pass," he said, more confidently than he felt. After hanging up, Mark began his closing routine, straightening shelves that barely needed attention after such a quiet day. As he turned the sign to closed, his phone rang with an unknown number. "Leone's Market," he said finally. "Mr. Leone, this is Colonel Robert Macaulay, United States Marine Corps. I believe you met a friend of mine recently. Some actions aren't applauded because they remind others of what they've forgotten. If you believe gratitude should be kept alive, type remember." The next morning, Mark found himself hesitating before unlocking the door. For the first time in 16 years, he questioned whether opening made sense. The controversy had affected more than just his reputation. Suppliers were backing away, customers were choosing other stores, and the practical reality of running a small business with declining revenue couldn't be ignored. He was arranging a display when the bell jingled. A small girl, perhaps 7 years old, approached clutching a paper bag decorated with crayon drawings. "Are you Mr. Leone?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark nodded, kneeling to meet her eye level. "That's me. What can I help you with?" She placed the bag on the counter. "These are cookies my mom and I made. I don't have money, but I wanted you to know. My mom says you're a good person." Before Mark could respond, the ground seemed to vibrate beneath his feet. A mechanical rumble filled the air, growing louder until it was impossible to ignore. Through the windows, he watched as a convoy of military vehicles rolled down the normally quiet street. Humvees, tactical trucks and SUVs, bearing Marine Corps insignia. The vehicles parked in formation, blocking traffic in both directions. Mark stepped outside, the cookie bag still in his hand, as nearly 30 Marines in service uniforms exited the vehicles and formed a line across the sidewalk. A tall man with silver at his temples stepped forward, his uniform adorned with the insignia of a full colonel. "Adam Leone, Colonel Robert Macaulay, 1st Reconnaissance Battalion. May we speak with you?" Stunned, Mark nodded, acutely aware of neighbors and passers-by stopping to stare at the extraordinary scene. "Mr. Leone," Colonel Macaulay began, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent block. 3 days ago, you showed exceptional kindness to a Marine who served under my command. Howard Finch is more than just a veteran. He was our senior combat medic during some of the darkest days in Fallujah. What you might not know is that Howard saved 14 Marines during a single firefight, refusing evacuation despite his own injuries. He's been awarded the Silver Star for valor, though he rarely speaks of it. Mark glanced at the assembled Marines, their faces solemn and respectful. "Howard doesn't easily accept help," Macaulay continued. "His pride has sometimes kept him from reaching out, even to those who owe him their lives. But what you did, treating him with dignity rather than pity, accomplished something even we haven't always managed. You treated him like a man still living, not just a veteran who once served." One by one, the Marines entered the store. Each made a small purchase, a pack of gum, a bottle of water, a candy bar, paying with exact change and offering a crisp "Thank you, sir" to Mark. "These aren't locals," Mark observed quietly. "You brought them from Fort Ironclad. That's hours away." Macaulay nodded, When we heard what happened and the backlash you faced, it wasn't a hard decision. We were already in the region for training exercise. After the last Marine completed his purchase, Macaulay presented Mark with a small plaque. This establishment is officially recognized by the United States Marine Corps for outstanding service to one of our finest. As the Marines returned to their vehicles, a crowd had gathered. Among them, a woman recorded the scene on her phone. By evening, the video would be online with a new caption. The man they mocked now has the Marines standing at attention in front of his store. When asked by a reporter what had motivated him, Mark's response was simple. I just did what I believed my father would have done. Nothing more, nothing less. When the world chooses silence, one small action can touch the hearts of those who once risked everything. If you still believe in delayed but meaningful justice, type salute. The weeks following the Marines' visit transformed Leona's mart in ways Mark never anticipated. Veterans and military families now made regular detours to shop there, often traveling from neighboring communities. Mark didn't alter his prices or expand his inventory. He simply added a small sign near the register. To anyone who has worn the uniform, today water is free. It wasn't an elaborate gesture, just an acknowledgement that some debts can never truly be repaid. But small recognitions matter. Howard Finch became a regular visitor, not just on pension days, but often in the quieter afternoons, when he would sit on a stool by the counter, occasionally sharing stories with Mark about his time in service. Never the brutal realities of combat, but the moments in between, the camaraderie, the shared jokes that made unbearable situations bearable. On the wall behind the register, Mark hung the photograph of Howard with his unit. Beside it was mounted a folded flag, one that had draped the coffin of a Marine from Howard's unit who hadn't made it home. Howard had kept it all these years, but one day brought it to the store with a handwritten note. Thank you for remembering us while we're still here. Colonel Macaulay visited occasionally when duties brought him to the area. During one such visit, a local reporter asked him why the Marines had responded so dramatically to Mark's gesture. People often thank veterans for their service, Macaulay explained, but Mark did something different. He didn't just offer words, he stood up, took a personal risk, and chose a side when it would have been easier to stay neutral. That's something any Marine can understand. The businessman who had caused the initial confrontation never returned to the store. However, 6 months later, Mark received an anonymous donation to his newly established Veterans Pantry program, a simple shelf of essentials that any veteran could access without question when times were tough. The donation came with no name, just a note. I was wrong that day. Thank you for showing me a better way. That night, Adam sat beneath the soft buzz of the store's old sign, watching the reflections in the front window. Uniforms, shadows, he hadn't set out to be seen, only to honor something his father once told him. You don't measure a man by his wallet, but by how he treats someone with nothing left to give. And in that truth he realized, he'd gained more than customers. He'd found community stitched quietly back together by honor. We don't need heroes, one veteran said during a small gathering at the store. We need to be seen as real people, not living monuments. Some people no longer carry weapons, but still fight to keep gratitude alive. The battlefield changes, but the courage remains the same. When I first heard about what Mark did, I thought of my grandfather. He was quiet, never asked for praise, but once a stranger gave him a seat on a bus and he talked about it for years. That's how deep small kindness can go. Mark didn't try to go viral. He just tried to do what was right. Maybe that's the kind of courage we need more of. If this story reminded you of someone who once helped without asking for anything, share it with them, because quiet heroes deserve to be remembered too.